Hello and welcome to today's Lunchtime Learning webinar from Robinson's Facility Services. This is the third in our series, and today's topic is all about Legionella control. I'm your host, Kevin Ayres. Now, Legionella control is like one of those topics that's really easily missed. It kind of tends to affect, let's be honest, dull, out of the way equipment that just kind of usually just works. It's not an issue until it is, and then it can be really, really serious. So I'm really pleased we've got an expert on hand who can shed some light on some of those dark corners of your operations and help keep everyone safe. So let's do a bit of techie stuff here. Let's welcome Ben to the webinar. Ben.
Good afternoon, Kevin.
Good to see you. Good to
Are you
see
okay?
you. Yeah, good. What's it like? You're in Yorkshire, I assume. I'm not today. I'm down in Devon today. So what's it like up there?
It's wet and dull as normal in Leeds.
I'm very tempted to make a joke there, but I'm not going to. To be fair, it is pretty. It's not wet, but it is pretty dull. It's kind of a standard winter overcast day here. Ben, we've got loads of people online watching already. We got, we got about 29 people on. So it's great. Thanks for giving up your lunchtime. I hope you're eating something nice wherever you are. So Ben and I'm going to talk to Ben for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have time for some questions. And if you're too shy, we've got some kind of quick fire questions that I can rattle off with Ben at the end. So Ben, where are we? We've got a little bit of time. We had a little bit of time for people to join. So Ben, why don't we just dive into this? Firstly, kind of like, well, what is Legionella control? Why is it a concern for commercial properties?
Well, in terms of control, it's a very good question, and quite often I find that there is a lot of bad guidance, a lot of bad advice out there where people just aren't doing enough. Control is basically a number of measures, from anything from completing a risk assessment to clean disinfection services to temperature monitoring and maintenance, all with a view of trying to control the bacteria from multiplying and growing in your water systems.
Great. So, well, I guess that begs the question to somebody that doesn't know an awful lot about this, and I'm guessing online here we've got people who are real experts with this and already dealing with this, through to people like, I've kind of heard of this thing and I know I probably ought to be doing something about it, but I'm not really sure what. So why don't we kind of just take a step back and go, well, what is Legionella? Let's start with that.
Legionella is a bacteria that is mainly found in natural water, so reservoirs, lakes. But since it kind of came to our attention in 1976, that makes it's a fairly new bacteria in those terms. The problem we have is when it gets into our commercial, well, any sort of building water systems, and that's where we have a problem. It's generally okay in its own environment, but once it gets into a man-made water system, given the right environment, we can have problems with it, and hence why there's statutory obligations to manage it as a building manager, or if you are in charge of maintenance and running of a building, there are obviously control measures that you need to implement.
Sure. Well, that sounds pretty obvious, I guess. And just before we rush on, just so it's a bacteria. So what effect can that have on, how does it affect people or animals, or the things we'd be concerned about?
Well, the bacteria is aerobatic, so you contract Legionnaires disease by breathing in the water droplets. So you can't catch it by contaminated, by drinking contaminated glass or shaking someone's hand or anything. So it's all about managing, and this is why the control is really important, that you put the right controls in place, because all systems are different. You have higher risk systems in some buildings, lower risk. So it shouldn't be some sort of blanket bomb approach where, they're all done the same. You could have all sorts of different systems. You could have spa pools, you could have a lot of showers, you might not have any showers, you might have storage systems. So they're all very, very different in that regard. So your controls are generally led by what you have on site, and that's where starting with a risk assessment is always the best course of action. Over the years,
There's
I mean,
no
I've been in the sorry.
Sorry, there's no one size fits all. In other words, because it kind of really depends on your system. So just quickly to hone in on that though, like, so what if I got Legionella? If I got this bug in, what would it do to me? Like, how ill would I be? How long would I be? Is it going to kill me? Is it just going to make me ill, or what?
Legionella is a form of pneumonia. So the media have, obviously from a media perspective, it's the media love it. It's there's a lot of scaremongering out there, and that's where you need to put a lot of these things into perspective. Your job really as a building manager is to make sure you have the right control measures in place. Even if there isn't an issue, you might have an audit, but you need to make sure those measures are in place so that if there is an issue, it can be managed like that. But in terms of you as an individual contracting Legionnaires, not all of them are fatal. I think the stats at the moment, I think it's got a fatality rate of about 10 to 20% in the UK. So hopefully, the majority of the time, can be treated.
Right, but like that's still pretty bad, right? So it's not like going to make me a bit poorly. There's a chance this thing could kill me, right? And so I guess there must be legal obligations then to control this. So what are some of those?
Well, it's not. Again, these are guidance documents. It's not illegal not to have Legionella control in place. It's not illegal not to have a risk assessment. But there is guidance set out by the Health and Safety Executive, HSG 274, and the Approved Code of Practice L8, primarily the key documents that you need to abide by. And if you don't abide by them, make sure you have your own control measures in place that are suitable and would be deemed satisfactory to the HSE. And I look at it very much like like the Road Traffic Act. If you caught speeding, you prosecute under the Road Traffic Act. In the same way, if you are prosecuted for not having the right control measures in place, you prosecute under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So it's not a directly legal obligation just to get that kind of right. These are guidance documents to help you as a building manager maintain control.
Sure, but I guess as if that was me to take your speeding example, right, I could say, well, I don't have to do this, but ultimately I could still kill myself and other people. So it's still something I want to abide by and take measures to. I passed my advanced driving test last year as a result of speeding. I kind of educated myself about how to be a better driver, right? So it's a similar kind of thing. We want to be, hopefully people who are here watching want to be sort of responsible building owners. We don't want to have to kind of go to the HSE, sorry, I didn't do that, and to our customers, clients, and staff, right? So okay, so what are how does Legionella? Surely there's a closed system. So how does Legionella even get into our buildings? Why should it be a concern? How does it get in?
Well, like I said, it's a fairly, we learn obviously every year as development goes on, but over the last 45 years since it's been around, so to speak, even though it's been around for thousands of years, but since we've known about it, we now know it, it travels in natural water systems, so it can travel on your mains water. So there is an argument to say that even our homes, you can't stop the bacteria on low levels entering a normal domestic system. Your job as a building manager is to make sure the control measures don't allow the multiplication of that. And that might be temperature control, carrying out certain remedial works, disinfection works. But your job really is, there is no kind of stop where you can stop the bacteria from entering. It will naturally, it can live in mains water on very low levels. Mains water is generally chlorinated up to about 0.5 ppm. So even at that low, even at chlorinated water that we can all consume,
really,
it can be found. So the problem we have is once it gets into a man-made water system, we give it a hotel environment where it might be nice and warm. There might be rusty water tanks, redundant pipe work. Primarily temperature on domestic systems are the big problem. And that's where, with the environments like that, you will have multiplication. And what the key thing here is I always have. I've been in the industry 20 years now, but the key thing is it's not the driver, it's not the car, it's the driver. So you really need to be assessing who is the operator in the building. You know, a gym full of 25-year-olds compared to an end of life care home are two completely different risks. They might have similar water systems,
Yeah,
but your risks are much higher in a care environment. And this is where you shouldn't just have a blanket bomb approach in terms of control measures. Really assess who is using the building, what are their susceptibility risks, and those kind of things. So we know it will travel on the water network. We can't really stop it getting into the water system. Your job is to now control, make sure your temperatures are right, your remedial works where there are risks identified and managed, and you're fulfilling your statutory obligations in terms of having a robust control measure. Doing a Legionella sample once a year and thinking, oh, it's fine, it's clean. You might have a negative system now. It doesn't mean you would have in an hour or 24 hours, So this is an ongoing control, which
sure.
it's not a case of
There's some obvious similarities. A couple of webinars ago, we had a pest control expert in, and it sounds very similar. Like, you could today you haven't got a rat infestation, but there's nothing to say it couldn't happen tomorrow. So if you leave it too long, guess what? You didn't realize that the next day after you did the testing or you went looking, you don't have a problem. So yeah, I guess it's that staying on top. And I guess with things like bacteria, there's the kind of concept of bacterial load, right? You can't stop bacteria, but if it's very low
yeah,
levels, then your body typically cope with that. It's when it's kind of overwhelmed because there's the
yeah,
concentration of bacteria high,
yeah,
and again, that's why the idea of control rather than stopping this thing. I guess
yeah.
that's not a very helpful way, but control is a better way of thinking about it.
I try and keep things fairly simple. I'm not a microbiologist, but I've been in the industry a long time, and I look at it in the same way with your food in the fridge. You put your food in the fridge so bacteria doesn't grow. So in the same way with Legionella control, you're trying to avoid lukewarm temperatures. If you left your food on the
Right.
side and then ate the next day, you probably end up with a bad stomach. So you put it in the fridge to keep the temperature low. So bacteria doesn't grow. In the
Sure.
same way, that's what in effect, you're trying to do with the water system, keep your hot water
Slow down
hot.
that multiplication. Yeah.
Yeah, and the cold, and
You
that's
mentioned before,
in simple terms.
sorry, you mentioned before, and I don't think you actually meant to do this, but you said about we're kind of providing a hotel environment. Now, you shared some sort of slides for me before, and you mentioned, we just bring one of those up. Because I like this story. Where are we? Oh, we've gone to the wrong slide. Let's go back a little bit. You mentioned you sent me this one. So tell us about this. So this was kind of like a real life example of a real hotel. So it really was a hotel for Legionnaires' disease.
Well, the Bellevue, Staffordshire was where it came about. So there were
Okay,
it was a an annual event where legions gathered together, ex-military personnel in the US, and it was I think there was 2,000 people attending the event. And ultimately, after this one event in '76, 200 of them became ill, and 34 of them
wow.
died. So this is where it all started, and hence the name. If people ever think where's the name come from, it was ultimately
Yeah,
named
I
after the
did wonder. Yeah,
legions.
I was going to ask you. So I
Yeah.
hadn't made that. Yeah, cool. So it's on the
So
slide, but I didn't make that connection.
again, they didn't know whether it was food poisoning. There was a lot of pressure at the time on scientists to find out what it was. It took about a year to find out it was a bacteria that lived in water, and it effectively taken over the building water system. And that was the result. So that was the first time as humans would ever come across it. But looking in history now and the research and development that goes on with it, it's obviously been around as long as mankind's been around. It lives in its
Right.
reservoirs and soil and own environments. But so in that regard, it's still fairly new. So what you will find going forward is there are changes to the guidance documents. They do generally get a bit more robust every year. You might find that certain, they brought in expansion vessel flushing not so long ago, and you'll find that there will be changes constantly. So you do need to keep up to date with the guidance or your service providers with any changes to make sure that your controls are still satisfactory.
Sure, and I guess we've come across it because we're now controlling water. There may be times where water sort of still and can get stagnant because it's like you say in an expansion vessel or something. It's not kind of moved on. It's not being flushed out regularly, and maybe it's warm for some reason, either at warm summer or because of heating in a hotel or whatever. And it's a great breeding ground, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned the it's not a legal requirement, but there is kind of you mentioned some uh, you mentioned the health and safety executive. So tell us a little bit about the sort of I think you mentioned HSG 274 and things like that. Can you talk us through some of the kind of legislation, sort of pseudo legislation again? My way of putting
These
it,
are
but
these are guidance documents to ultimately help you as building managers, building operators, and this is where you generally use a service provider to summarise. I suppose it'd be like using a lawyer for a certain thing. You get an expert in to kind of summarise these documents, but your control measures need to be in line with HG 274 and the approved code of practice L8. So yeah, they're not. These are guidance documents written by the HSE. So in the case of an incident, God forbid, or an audit, you need to make sure that those control measures are in line with that document. But what's really important, and I find over the years, is that the most important process for you all to start with is a risk assessment and making sure that's procured properly. Over the years, it's a commoditized industry, as we all know, with all these things. And you know, it's important that the survey is done properly and substantially. Otherwise, if there's things missed, if there's risks missed, systems missed, remedial works will be missed. Control measures won't be robust enough. So, for myself personally, giving some general advice out, it's really important that the risk assessment is done completely thoroughly, and it's not a shelf document. It should be a live document. You're up to date with. If there are any changes, you need to be updating that risk assessment if it needs to be, or if it's as simple as maybe a basin replacement, you might take a note of that. But it shouldn't be a document where we've done them in February, we can now put it on the shelf and forget about it for a couple of
yeah,
months. Yeah, it shouldn't
yeah.
be a tick box
I mean,
exercise.
I have a
Sorry, go
tiny insight into this back in the day. So I used to work for Esso, the Fawley Refinery, as a young engineer, and I remember that they'd have to we'd have to go out and do site visits, and they used to really emphasise that because you can, as a young engineer, you can kind of look at a diagram of what things should look like and a valve, there's like a little two triangles. You get out there and it's like this big and it's just rusted completely solid, and it feeds a tank that has got a hole in it, and is covered in rust, and and so that actually, you sent me some pictures here. Let's just have a look at those, just to kind of emphasize the point here. Um, so this is kind of what the diagram says. When you look at the documents, you get out there, and it's kind of actually, it could be a rusty old tank with holes in it, or some hideous stuff going on. So that survey, talk us through some of these.
Yeah, I
What's
mean,
happening here?
again, if you refer to the guidance, it's not mandatory where you need to disinfect a water system. The guidance says inspect annually. Now, a remedial
Right.
work such as a disinfection would be raised following that inspection. So whether it's yourself doing it or a service provider, they would generally inspect the tank. If there was a need for disinfection, they should evidence it with a picture. Because again, it's all open, it's guidance, it's open for debate. You might think it's okay, the service provider won't. But like anything, as soon as you store water, it's open to bacteria. So these systems need to be maintained. And the example on the left is a tank that's on a roof area. So the issue you'll have there is heat gain, weather. It will potentially damage from birds and all sorts of other different sort of animals, maybe trying to get into a drink or just generally deterioration by being weathered. And then the examples in the middle are tanks that have maybe had no lids for years, so you need a tight fitting lid. Um, the example in the middle where you've got effectively the skin over the top, that's known as a biofilm. That's always a good sign that the tank's not turning over. So if you ever see that, it's 9 times out of 10, that will be it's probably whatever it was feeding. It's now no longer feeding. You might have got some basins or a bathroom it was feeding. It's no longer being fed. So you develop like this effectively skin over the top, which is a biofilm, and bacteria can live and breed and multiply rapidly in biofilm. So it's a bit of a no-no from a hygiene point of view. So these are just examples. You need to keep water systems um, moving, keep them clean, and especially if you're consuming the water. I mean, it's one of these is bad enough if you're thinking about showering or washing, but if you the thought of drinking out of one of them is it's
Yeah, yeah.
another story.
Well, I refer back to again to the pest control webinar we had. We live in the countryside in a farmhouse, so it's kind of the outside is constantly trying to get in, and generally does quite a good job. And it's kind of my worst nightmare that some bird or rat is sort of rotting away in my upstairs water tank or something.
Yeah.
So I'm quite pleased that they do come and check quite regularly. And then we're also off grid for water, so they came and checked it all the other day and replaced the UV. Thing the other day. So yeah, that kind of I guess that I think if I was a facilities manager, I just want to know that I'm kind of on top of this stuff, so I can sleep at night, right? To make sure that people aren't going to get ill on my watch, kind of thing. So if I'm in that role, and I'm guessing there'll be people, one of the many people who are watching, some of the many people watching are in that kind of role. What you referred to some of them, but like, what are some of the specific steps that property managers can take to mitigate this risk? Like what can they do proactively?
Like I've said before, your first course of action should always be a risk assessment. I have people who contact me and say, I've been told I need a Legionella test, and it's just wrongful advice, and it wouldn't stand any sort of defence. Should an issue go on, you can't manage a risk that you don't know what it is. The only way you're going to understand those risks is by having a risk assessment done. So it shouldn't be let's try and get the cheapest risk assessment, and then we're happy to pay whatever in terms of remedial work. Your priority always is the risk assessment and ultimately temperature control. So my priority would always be let's have a look at what we've got first. Where the risk. So have complete a risk assessment, and when you have risk assessments done, it's so important. I've done, many years of surveying. You must support the surveyor, whoever they are, whether it's a service surveyor you deal with now or whether you deal with Robinsons. It doesn't need to be the most technical person in the world, but someone who understands the site, who has access to all the keys and all the rooms. There's nothing worse when you get on site and someone says, here's a bunch of keys. Can you crack on? Things will be missed. And if things are missed, remedial works will be missed. Risk, so supporting them and giving them as much information as you can from old records, from an old risk assessment, and some sort of diagrams are always helpful. As-built drawings are even better, but it's rare. In reality, you get these available. So yeah, I would always start with the risk assessment and then follow the risk assessment. That's the reason why you've had it done. If it's recommending a control scheme, a specific one for certain risks, you might have showers, use that as a scope of works effectively for implementing your next control. Like I've said, you can't manage a system. You can't control a system that you don't know anything about. So start with the risk assessment and implement and use that as your scope of works to go forward.
And might that involve actually treating the water at all, or either occasionally or as a kind of an ongoing thing?
Yeah.
What about monitoring? Like, is it just a case of that people come on site and test this, or can you put in sort of ongoing? Is there any sort of ongoing monitoring you can put in?
Again, the risk assessment should lead you on the control, but as a general rule, it's split. It's generally in 3 sections. So you normally do your risk assessment to start with. You have a control scheme, but there may be remedial work. So you might have water tanks as a great example here. they're non-compliant. There's all sorts of things wrong
Right.
with them from not being clean. They're not, there's no lids. There's probably no rodent filters. They're not like there's numerous remedial works. They will be brought up on the risk assessment. So again, you would complete remedial works either depending on your technical team in house or with support of your contractors, but trying to get your building as compliant as you can by working through your risk assessment is important.
Okay. Now that's really really helpful. So what are the let's just get rid of that a sec. What are the let's say we've had a problem, or we picked the cheap option, right? The kind of the ticky box option. We didn't really take it seriously. We got like a test, or even worse, we didn't do anything. Like, what are the consequences of that if there was a Legionella outbreak? Like,
We
what I
find,
guess,
yeah,
obviously there's health consequences, but what are kind of like what ton of bricks is about to drop on me from who, right?
well, you don't need to have an issue anymore to be audited. The HSE are quite welcome. And if there is an issue nearby, or they're quite they're the power to audit your system. So you again,
Right.
what you said about risk, where you might have low risk systems, high risk systems, depending on what sort of site you have. But your job really as a building manager is to make sure your statutory obligations are met. You might think, well, we've done the risk assessment, there's no kind of further action to take, it's mains fed, we don't have any showers, risks are generally low. You always want to be in a position, if you're audited, it's like anything in life, it's fine till it goes wrong, and then it's
Yeah.
contracts out. And in the same way, you don't want to be in an uncomfortable position where you've got an aggressive prosecution lawyer bringing you loads of questions. Why didn't you do this? Why did you use this service provider when you could have used this? And you keep, there was this, So I always
Yeah.
encourage you to try and do at least the minimum what the guidance says, and then you've done your best. It doesn't mean you completely eradicate the risks, but your control schemes, they meet the guidance documents. You're doing your best to control it. There's, you're doing what you can to manage the risk. And like I said, you can't ever get away from the bacteria living in the water system. It will naturally find its way into the system. It's
Yeah,
your job
it's not a
really
binary
to
thing.
avoid the
Yeah,
environment.
yeah. Like all risk, you can't totally eradicate risk. You can, you've got
Exactly.
to live with the fact that there's a inherent risk there, but you're
Yeah.
managing it and you're being seen to
Yeah.
manage it. So, do you have any examples of where people didn't manage this risk well, and the HSE did come down on them like a ton of bricks, or they got prosecuted, or something like that? What
Well,
do you have any examples of?
the biggest outbreak in the UK as it stands is still the Barrow in Furnace outbreak. I think there was 7 deaths and 200 affected
Wow.
there. And ultimately, it was a badly managed cooling tower when it went to trial eventually. Um, there was loads of holes found with Barrow Council and the service provider at the time, Interserve, where it was just badly managed from the council all the way through. And as you can imagine, the prosecution went through it thread to needle. And this is what I say when I do my training sessions. Even if you're responsible for just flushing water, you are part of that control. You might not be the responsible person or the deputy person. You might think, well, I'm only flushing the tap. You are part of the control measure, and you will form part of that investigation should anything go wrong. So it's important that you have like refresher training, and people, even who are doing the mundane tasks, understand the importance of what they're doing. Um, so these things do happen, and God forbid it's not that, it's not as regularly, it's not all the time, but we do have outbreaks a lot. If you go on the HSE website, you can see the live, there's a live update with them all on. If they've not come to, if they're at trial, they won't kind of disclose the names, obviously, but there's cases going on all the time. There might be high risk systems, but you find them in nursing homes. And Bupa were prosecuted in 2018. Um, there's all sorts of different sites, from processed water systems to nursing homes to even JTF were prosecuted pre-COVID over a case with a hot tub. So it's from all walks of life, um, that these issues occur.
Sure, and again, I know I keep referring back to it, but it's a very similar issue with the rodents or the pest control rather. It's even if it's a relatively low risk, something like in a school where you've got loads of relatively healthy kids, it still doesn't play well in the media. Even if a few people just got ill and that was it, it still doesn't look good, right? So I
Yeah,
guess even from we don't want people to get ill, but neither do we want to be seeing people getting ill. It's just really bad all
yeah,
round for one's reputation, I guess. So,
yeah. I mean,
Luke,
commercially, it's terrible. Yeah, from a commercial perspective, putting aside the important area, organisations like Bupa and they do not want to be associated with
yeah,
because the media do love Legionnaires. It's, as soon as there's an issue, it's all over the media, as we all know. So, yeah, from a commercial perspective, it's not very good either.
not something we want to be associated with. So, Luke's asked. I think you addressed this, but I'll just ask it anyway, just to be on the safe side. It'd be great to have some examples of typical remedial works. You mentioned, I think, a little bit about that, but do you want to expand on that at all? Like what happens following a risk assessment? What would people have done?
Yeah.
What are the range of things they might have done?
Well, the key thing. This is not a do it and it's gone. You need a Legionella control. You need a Legionella budget going forward.
Sure, but to kind of get to
This is
like we know we want to be here, but like to get to there, there's some initial stuff, right? We've had a initial discussion. Oh my goodness, it's really
yeah.
bad. Like to even get on that kind of level playing field, what am I going to have to do? What might I have to do?
Well, there might be quite a number of remedial works from water tank replacements to pipe work, redundant pipe work having to be removed, boilers that are not
Right, because
performing.
they could just be water sat in
Yeah,
those
you might,
pipes, right?
well,
And just
you
very,
often find,
yeah,
especially with plumbing, where plumbers add on, there might be a building and they'll build an extension and they'll just tap into the pipe work. And before you know it, the performance of that boiler might not be sufficient for the size of the building. So you might be struggling to maintain control. And that is a word that I want you to all remember: control. It's all about, is your water system in control? If you are running water around a building and it's lukewarm, but you're trying to achieve temperatures of over 50 degrees, that building is out of control. Bacteria can grow. So, again, this is where your monthly monitoring is really important, that the testing, the non-conformances are raised. Because even if you've got a low temperature hot water, like I said, bacteria can grow. It might be an issue with the pump, the boiler. It needs to be investigated and looked at. As minor as it might be, it might trigger, there's quite a big issue that we have, and it might be something that needs to be planned for from a budget perspective, capital spend. But the ongoing testing is really important to raise that.
well, that's a perfect time to jump in. We've got a question here. Claire Willie's asked, in a health setting, specifically a GP surgery in her case, following a full report, how often should the water temperatures be checked? And is this the only check that we should be looking at?
Again, if it's a healthcare environment, you should refer to the healthcare document, which is HTM 0401. There is specific guidance because, again, it's about the susceptibility of the people. So is it a GP surgery? Was it a medical centre?
Yeah. Let me put the question on screen. So,
Yeah,
oh, sorry, no, that's the wrong one. That's the wrong one. Sorry, let me show that one. Hang on. Sorry, sorry, Claire. There's the question.
Yeah, you should be checking again. Follow the guidance, but you should have a monthly temperature regime. I would guess, I don't know the water system, but it's probably quite a simple water system. It might be a combination boiler, a little hot water cylinder. So it should be fairly simple for you to manage. And there's no reason why you couldn't do that in house with support of a service provider to oversee it. If it's quite, if there's only a few outlets, but again, follow the risk assessment. If there is any issues in terms of proliferation, showers are obviously a source. Again, follow the risk assessment, and that should guide you through it. But a simple monthly temperature regime should be sufficient on a GP surgery. hope that answers your question.
Okay, great. And I'm going to just show Harriet's here. That's why I put it up. It's a little bit similar. She's asking specifically, like, what equipment would they need to do that? You know, how would they do that temperature check? And is that easy for them to do? It sounds like it is, but what would they need?
Temperature checking is a fairly, it says what it says on the tin. It's a fairly simple, task to do. What's important, Harriet, is what you do with that information. So what you don't want to do is fill a logbook in, put it on the shelf, and if you need to understand the temperature profiling. So if the temperatures are wrong, you need to resolve that, or have an audit trail of, right, we found an issue, we contacted the plumber. We found an issue, Dave, the technical maintenance man, has dealt with this. So you keep.
I guess the question. So I'm gonna nail you here. So I just want to make sure that we answer the question. So what equipment do they actually need to get those temperatures?
You need a thermometer, a calibrated thermometer. So you can get these online. There'll be specific providers that sell.
Or a physical thing that sits on a pipe.
Infrareds they're not always very good because they're quite reflective. So again, there's loads on the market. There'll be options on like Amazon and stuff, but I would try and specifically find a provider, and they're not very expensive, but try and find an organisation that sells specific equipment for Legionella control, because you'll have then the support of maybe calibration service, or supporting documents that the equipment is relevant. You don't want them in a position where you said, well, I've been checking the temperatures with a chicken probe that I brought from home. You need to be, so try again, whatever you use, if you do your own.
Or, GP surgery, like forehead thermometer, or, under the tongue.
And the infrared ones, they were great when they came out, but they're very bad with pipe work. They reflect back, so you don't always get an accurate reading. They hit the basin first and go through the water. So just do a bit of due diligence. Whatever they're not a big spend anyway. So try and get a bit more of a premium one if you can. And when I say premium, it might be.
It's like that calibration again, like anything. It's only as good as how well it's tested and that sort of thing. So,
well, you don't want to be in a position again where people question the authority and say, "Well, when did you last calibrate it? It's been in the cupboard for 4 years." Yeah. Well, you're not. It's again not
calibrated. What? I didn't know how to do that. Yeah.
So it might be. I know it's not very green, but it might be cheaper that you just replace the gauge every year rather than get it posted off to be calibrated. You have those sorts. I mean, service providers use quite, robust things because they're on it all day. You don't need anything of that sort of level going forward. I think I've frozen again.
Oh, okay, right. Well, to save time, we can still hear you. So I know it's a comedy look, so we're gonna keep that. I'm gonna jump to Stephen. I'm gonna jump to Stephen here. Thanks for the seminar. You're very welcome. And I picked this one because I've been a landlord myself, so I kind of I feel a pain. So in a multi-let office with one water supply, which then feeds separate tenants, I'm assuming that's premises, not demises. But do you believe the landlord should be responsible for temperature testing all outlets within the building, or just those in the common parts?
Excuse the punch, but it's a real common problem, and it ultimately comes back to what was agreed. And when you have a building with multiple tenants, you have to define who's doing what, and there might be an element of crossover because you're using the same water system. Who's inspecting the tank? But I would always go back to your agreement ultimately and see what's in there. It might be that you have a full repairs and lease maintenance package where you need to maintain the water system. It might be that the landlord's responsibility. But if it's all a bit grey, I think you need to go back and decide who's doing what, with a view, if it is ever inspected, your ducks are in line and you know where you are in life. But it happens especially, you look at the city centres with all these flats, and some are commercial, some are residential. We're doing it, it is a much more common problem. And I would rather you have a bit of crossover than you do not enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just make sure, what does the paperwork say? What are you responsible for ultimately? Carl's asked here, he's nailing you here. So he's saying, you mentioned temperature checks, but not given guidance on the kind of the specifics. So what are the critical temperatures that people need to watch out for, above or below, or, you
Yeah.
sort of mentioned it in general terms? And again, is that more it's horses for courses, or are there specific temperatures
The key temperatures, I mean, it's in the guidance, but the key temperatures, you need to keep your cold water under 20 degrees. So under 20 degrees, Legionella can live, but it's dormant. So if you can imagine its own environment in lakes and reservoirs, it doesn't really cause a lot of problem because it's generally under the temperature. The benefit we have with our climate here, we don't live in Southeast Asia or Australia, or where the temperatures are high and you've got a problem straight away. But right. Our main's water and water out, and it's generally under 20 degrees, so we're generally all right. The key is to avoid 20 to 45 degrees. So you need to be managing water systems. Boilers should be stored at 60 degrees, and they should be reaching your outlets at minimum 50 degrees. So it gives you a little bit of a threshold.
So I'm just going to jump in there because where are we? I think Harriet. Claire asked a follow-up question, so maybe that answers that we currently check monthly near the boiler, and then from presumably where it's going to cool down the most. Is that kind of the way she should do that?
Yeah, it depends on the size of the system again. I mean, this is where you've got to be careful with what you've got. If you've got a small system the size of a house, it's a lot different to an infirmary hospital or a big college site. So yeah, so the guidance
surgery. So let's assume it's kind of a mid-sized surgery. How about that?
Yeah, so you do your nearest and furthest as per the risk assessment, and you normally do a percentage of the outlets between that. So all the other outlets get checked once a year. The reality of it is, if you've only got 5 outlets in the building, for the sake of it, I would probably do all of them. But if you're doing the likes of the Leeds General Infirmary, doing all the temperatures in one go would probably take you a month. So you would manage that a bit differently, where you would follow the guidance where you do all your nearest and furthest at a percentage of what the class as the other outlets in the hospitals. But if it's a small site and there's a handful of outlets and you want, I would probably, for the sake of it, to keep it clean and keep it nice, I'll probably just do all the checks once a month.
Right. Okay, that's really helpful. And I'm just going to take one last question from Caroline. So I know we're danger running over here, and I just want to get you back to your day jobs. So from Caroline, do we need a risk assessment if our water is recycled for a CNC machine?
Can you just clarify the CNC machine and what kind of site you are?
I don't know if Caroline's going to do that quick enough. So if that's not,
well, I'll just give you an risk assessment should be a live document. So it's quite common people revisit a risk assessment every 2 years, but this has got to be led by you. It is your risk. It's not the service providers. It isn't the contract. This is your risk, and it's ultimately your responsibility. So if you feel the risk assessment is still live and it's sufficient and nothing's changed, there is an argument why reinvent the wheel and spend the money if you've kept it live. If, for instance, you've done a risk assessment and it was a college building, but now it's an end-of-life care home, well, I would say the risk assessment needs to be revisited because it doesn't reflect what it was at the time. So, but it's got to be led by you. It's your risk, and you've got to try not to get dragged into. People say, "We'll take the risk away from you." Well, no, it's the buck stops with you. It's who you appoint to help you and how you do it. So, I would always follow the risk assessment. If you're not happy with the risk assessment or things have changed, I would revisit the risk assessment and bring that further forward.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you, Ben. Sorry, I kept you frozen like that, but thank you. You've been super helpful, and I hope you've all found today's session thought-provoking. So, Ben, I'll let you go. I'll put you out of your misery and take your screen for a sec there. So remember, you'll be able to watch this webinar again, and do share it with your colleagues, especially if some of the details we've whizzed past you want to rewind and watch again. You can also see just want to show the previous. Let's bring up the link. You can see the previous sessions. The URLs shown below here. We're building up a whole kind of library of useful videos There's a whole load of topic videos there, and all the previous webinars will be available at this very URL. So go and check those out. And this one will be available kind of in a few days for you to watch the replay. So firstly, thanks for watching. Look out for any future webinars we do in the new year. If you have any further questions or interested in how Robinson's facility services can help you control Legionella or lifts or pests or any of the other, many other services we provide, please do get in touch. Just put those details on screen. And thanks for watching.